Hi guys and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about a very simple yet very interesting thing that we have in our framework, which is parallel execution. हम सभी ने during our preparation for interviews or during the time when we're given interviews or while we are working in any organization, हम सभी ने parallel execution का नाम भी सुना है, हम सभी इसको use भी कर रहे हैं. But sometimes when we talk about or when we give interviews, people ask like पैरेलल एग्जीक्यूशन आप कैसे करेंगे? एक बहुत ही सिंपल सा आंसर विच वी फाइंड ऑन इंटरनेट इज कि हम अपने टेस्ट इन जीएक्सएमएल में वी हैव अ possibility of having a tag called parallel, and that tag will give whether we want to execute test in parallel or we want to implement parallelization on methods or on classes, right? And we give this thread count as whatever number we want to give and whatever number that's our resources support. What does this mean? Like, for example, in this case, I have a thread count of 4. This means that my framework should be able to execute 4 test cases in parallel at a time very high level, right? Which is fine, right? But sometimes interviewer would ask you to go a little bit deeper. So this is just telling our framework that we want to execute 4 test cases. But how do we enable our framework to actually execute those 4 test cases, right? ठीक है, इसी के पैरेलल में there is another discussion which is worth discussing right now, which is about a design pattern called singleton design pattern. हम इंटरनेट पर whenever we will check and when we are preparing for interviews, design pattern हम चेक करते हैं. Singleton is a very famous design pattern, ठीक है, जिसमें क्या होता है, एक क्लास का एक इंस्टेंस वेरिएबल क्रिएट हो सकता है. तो we have a private constructor in that, and then we have a public getter setters using which we will get that instance of a class. सिंगलटन की इम्प्लीमेंटेशन हाउ वी डू इन आवर फ्रेमवर्क, इसका एक बहुत ही फ्रीक्वेंटली सीन आंसर ऑन इंटरनेट इज कि WebDriver इंस्टेंसिएशन के लिए वी यूज सिंगलटन सो दैट देयर इज जस्ट वन इंस्टेंस ऑफ WebDriver. बट आई फाइंड इट लिटिल बिट फ्लॉड इन द फैक्ट दैट on one side we are saying that we want to execute parallel execution, जिससे हमारा feedback time जो है और execution time जो है test cases का वो कम हो. On the other side we are saying that we just want to have one instance variable of a WebDriver. But that's not correct, right? क्योंकि अगर एक ही instance होगा तो आप एक ही test case एक time पे execute कर सकते हो. अगर आप एक instance पे multiple test cases execute करने की try करोगे, what would happen is कि आपके जो test cases हैं वो एक test case दूसरे test case के execution में problem create करेगा. आपके रिजल्ट्स जो हैं बहुत फ्लेकी हो जाएंगे and you cannot rely on your automation, which is obviously not something that you want, right? So how do we enable it? So singleton is not a way how we should actually initialize our WebDriver. So that's one thing. Now how do we do it then? So there is a concept of ThreadLocal, right? ये हमें Java से मिला है ThreadLocal concept. Which basically what it is, it's a class. If you see ThreadLocal पे जाके you will see it's a class. What it does is कि whenever any variable or anything calls its get or set methods, what it does is it gives those entities independently initialized copy of a variable. So whatever the variable we have defined as ThreadLocal variable, whenever that variable is being called using a get or a set method by any class or any instance variable or whatever, reference variable or whatever, ThreadLocal ensures that it gives an independent copy, initialized copy of that variable to that particular reference variable. So this line, whenever we are creating our framework, this line is very very important, especially for parallel execution. और आपके framework में और कुछ नहीं है, just this line. Everything else remains the same. This inherently what it does is it ensures that आपके एक thread में the thing that we were talking about singleton, ये somehow it also ensures that singleton but on a thread level कि एक thread को एक instance मिलेगा. If that thread again asks for a new instance or if it again asks for an instance of driver, ये basically checks कि whenever I'm asking for an instance, if instance is null, only then I'm going to create or initialize a new instance variable for that particular thread. Otherwise, I'm just going to return whatever it already have. ठीक है, तो ये somehow singleton को implement करता है. Singleton along with ThreadLocal, it makes it it helps us enable the parallel execution of test cases. ठीक है. तो इफ यू मूव अहेड, जो गेट ड्राइवर मेथड है, अगेन लाइक आई टोल्ड यू, यहाँ पर हम चेक करते हैं कि अगर ड्राइवर फॉर दैट थ्रेड इज ऑलरेडी इनिशियलाइज, it's just not going to go inside this inside. But if it is null, means no driver instance is there, so then it is initializing, for example, Chrome driver or Firefox driver based on whatever browser we have passed through our config files. It is going to create an instance of it and give it to us. Okay, that's about it. As simple as that. Very short answer. We use a ThreadLocal. We basically check if instance is already created. If it is created, we just return that instance. If not, then we just create a new instance for that particular thread. Okay. Now to demonstrate कि actual में does this even work or not. Okay. So I have two test XMLs created. If you see, there is one regression. Here I am basically calling three classes: flights booking class, tests class, and test 1 and test 2 classes. You see, I have three test classes here: test 1, test 2, and flights booking. Just ignore the names. This is not a standardized format. We should have a correct name which should depict like what exactly are we testing in that test case. For example, flight booking test, it's better where we are telling that this test case must be dealing with flight booking. Test 1, test 2 is not an ideal test naming convention. But all I want to show you is that for flights booking, all I'm doing is, I'll show you. All I'm doing is I'm going to base URL and I'll show you what is base URL. So base URL is make my trip. Browser is Chrome. So here, just a second. Here all I'm going is I'm going to the base URL and I'm printing the thread ID, whichever thread has initiated this particular test case, and creating its ID. And the hash code of the WebDriver, like if there is a driver instance that was given to that particular thread, what is the hash code of that? And I'm waiting for 20 seconds for this. For test 1, if you'll see, I'm going to google.com, again printing the same things: WebDriver hash code and the ID, thread ID, and I'm waiting for 5 seconds. And then test 2, what I'm doing is again the same thing, just going to amazon.com. And then this test I have created, ignoring the driver factory. What I'm doing, I have created a separate import class here, which what is doing it without taking care of anything of ThreadLocal and all. It's just creating one instance of a driver, and then that driver instance is used in all the three test cases. The three test cases A, B, and C, which basically one calls Apple, second calls Google, third calls Amazon. If you see, again I'm printing a thread ID, WebDriver hash code, and I'm waiting for 5 seconds here. That's one more thing. Thread.sleep is never to be used. I'm just using it for the demo purpose. It should never be used. We should use the WebDriver weights that are given to us. So explicit weights should be used whenever we are automating anything. This is a very bad automation practice. Right. Anyway, so this test class, it is not using ThreadLocal, and these three tests are using ThreadLocal. Right now, I'll just demo one thing. So if you see in regression, I have these test cases, these test classes, and in Smoke, I have this ThreadLocal test class, which has three test cases without using ThreadLocal. Okay. But let me show you. And again, to remind you, in all of them, I have written a wait of 5 seconds. Right, but they are not using ThreadLocal. There is just one instance of driver which is shared by all of them. Let's see how our framework behaves through that case if we have such type of execution. Okay. So setup is done. It opens Google, Amazon, Apple without waiting for 5 seconds. Now it's waiting for 5 seconds on Apple, and then it closes. So you see, like, because I was having just one instance variable of WebDriver and I executed multiple test methods in parallel, it did execute it, but every test case that was executed, it hampered the previous test case. I was supposed to wait on apple.com for 5 seconds, on Google for 5 seconds, on Amazon for 5 seconds. But here if you see, test C was executed first. So test C was Amazon. So first Amazon was open, and then it basically switched to test B, and then it switched to test A without waiting for those 5 seconds. Okay. And अगर आप यहाँ पर check करेंगे, the thing that we printed, if you see, we had multiple threads. like in our test ng we had defined it, right, that we will have 4 threads. So agar aap dekho, in these 3 executions that happened, we had 3 different threads that were created, thread 20, 21 and 19. The 3 different threads were there, but if you see one interesting thing here, WebDriver hash code is same. So eventually for each of the thread, same WebDriver was given, and as and when a particular thread executed, it basically overrode whatever execution was happening for the other thread. So that is the major disadvantage of not having ThreadLocal in your parallel execution. And even if you have a singleton and you try to execute in parallel, this is what you're going to get, and it is going to affect your test executions drastically. Now let's talk about this regression. Again, this regression, it also has 3 test cases, but here we are basically using the concept of that ThreadLocal also. If I execute it, it opens one window. Here you see it has opened 3 windows, one for Amazon, one for Make My Trip, and one for Google Doc. For Google, it waited for 5 seconds, I think. It closed. Then this is Make My Trip. And for Amazon, it waited for 10 seconds. Make My Trip is for 20 seconds. We were waiting for 20 seconds for this particular test case. Yeah, let's close after 20 seconds. Now, if I'll see here, you'll see that flight booking, this is the first test case, which was made for my trip. It waited for 20 seconds, 1 second here and there for setup and tear down. For test 2, it waited for 11 seconds because it was 10 seconds plus 1 second for here and there. And this was test 1, which was, I think, Amazon.com or whatever it was. It waited for 5 seconds. So all of them were executed in parallel. They had the different execution times, different weights in them. Let's see what happened with the ThreadLocal and the. You see here, again, different threads were given because we had asked in this that we can have a 4 thread from here. So different threads were given, and in parallel, if you see, WebDriver instances are also different. Right? So this is the power, or this is the thing, that this is how we actually implement our parallel application, how we enable our framework to have parallel execution capabilities. Not just by telling in or mentioning it in test engine. Because अगर आप test engine में mention कर दोगे like this case, but आपका framework, it does not support parallel execution, it is going to cause a lot of issue on your test cases. बहुत flaky results आएंगे and you will basically give up your automation to be true. So yeah, yes, that's about it. Like, this is something that I wanted to talk about. If anyone has anything that maybe they want to discuss, or if any suggestions on what we just discussed, I'll be happy to read through your comments. Please do comment, and if you like the content that I'm currently trying to share, do subscribe and do share it with your friends. Maybe someone will help from it. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.